Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Rado Palamario, Managing Director of Elcott Global. Delighted to have with us today David Simchi Levi, who is a well-known figure in the world of supply chain and engineering. He's a professor of engineering systems at MIT. He has also founded a few companies through the course of his career, which we will talk more about in the realm of supply chain data analytics. He is an expert in the fields of supply chain management, operations, business analytics, and he has published several books on the topic that are being read worldwide, and there's a lot of people that have found inspiration in the work that Professor David has done. So welcome, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the time.
Thank you, Radu. Welcome, everybody. Great to be here with you.
Excellent. So maybe let's start first and foremost about yourself. You've been around for a long time, but how did you end up in supply chain in the first place? It's a long time ago, yeah? But tell us the story.
Yep, thanks. I am an academic. I've been in academia for the last 30 years, at MIT over the last 22 years. But in parallel to being an academic, I started a few companies. The first company was in supply chain analytics, a company that focused on production planning and scheduling, inventory optimization, and supply chain design. I started the company in 97, and the company became part of IBM technology infrastructure in 2008. At that time, we had around 350 clients using our technology. I stayed supporting IBM for a couple of years, and then I started a business analytics company in 2011. Remember, in 2011, very few expert and supply chain companies talked about the use of AI for supply chain. That was a time where we started Opsul, the first company in business analytics. And then 2 or 3 years later, I started another company focusing on cloud technology for supply chain, business analytics, and operations. These two companies became part of Accenture over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm company free. I don't have any company right now. But at MIT, I lead the MIT Data Science Lab, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about the Data Science Lab. But more specifically, Radu, about your question, how did I end up focusing on supply chain? It's really an interesting journey. I got my PhD focusing on the development of analytics to address all sorts of problems, but most of the work that I've done focus on theory. And I was at that time at Columbia University in New York City, focusing on academic research. I received a phone call from the Board of Education in New York City, where the person on the other side of the line is telling me that this is, think about the timing, this is 95, telling me that the Board of Education in New York City is developing a decision support system for school bus routing, and they would like to collaborate with me and my lab in the development and implementation of the new technology. At that time, decision support system for school bus routing for any logistics problem was a new development. And so I was very reluctant. I was a young assistant professor. I was not necessarily very interested. And I remember the person on the other line paused for a few seconds and then asked me, "Professor, do you want to make an impact?" And I started thinking, here is my opportunity to transfer academic work to impact on practice. And my PhD student and myself started collaborating with the Board of Education. We developed this new system that won major awards. And then I realized, hey, I can develop analytics, I can develop technology that leadership, that executive can use. But how many school bus routings you have of the size and the challenge of New York City? Not many. And so we started looking around and we discovered supply chain. And the first development was a tool for supply chain design. The second development was a tool for multi-echelon inventory optimization. By the end of this process, we had 350 clients using our technology on a day-to-day basis. This is a technology that in 2008 became part of IBM technology infrastructure. So I would say about my experience, I teach planning, but a lot of the things that happened to me just happened without long-term plan, just because there were opportunities and I was fortunate enough to be at the right time with the right set of skills. And I'm sure we'll talk about skills and talent. This is an example of complementing luck with the appropriate skills.
I love it. So we've recently we've taken 26 CEOs and COOs, and we asked them what made them successful and how did they start in supply chain. And similarly to you, none of them actually wanted or thought that they would end up working in supply chain in the first place. But they found their way, they fell into it, and then they did the best out of it. And we have some amazing stories. But I love how even with yourself, that seems to be a common thread, that you had some really deep skills that you've continuously honed, on the analytics side, and then you've applied it to this field where it actually badly needs it, which is supply chain.
And I can tell you another phase in the development of my career. So I have done a lot of work in supply chain all the way until about 2011. But in 2011, talking about planning, I decided to take a pause and to reflect on what are the new opportunities that exist in the market that I should focus on, that my PhD student should focus on, that I should allocate my energy to work on. And I decided to stop doing just traditional supply chain research and focus on two areas. Remember, this is 2011. One area was supply chain resiliency. And that was talking supply chain resiliency, and I can tell you a little bit about my experience between 2011 and today. And the second area was focusing on business analytics, the ability to use, this is 2011, machine learning and AI to improve supply chain and operation. Today, everybody is talking about this. 2011, very few companies were interested either in supply chain resiliency or in business analytics. And I will demonstrate this with an amazing story, at least in my mind. So remember, 2011, I started focusing on the two topics. In supply chain resiliency, I was motivated by what happened during the tsunami in Japan and the flood in Thailand in that year. And if you remember, the year before, 2010, the volcano eruption in Iceland, affecting companies from the automotive industry to the high-tech industry. And so I started developing a new way for companies to measure the resiliency of their supply chain, identify hidden risk, and develop mitigation strategies. And I was fortunate enough that Ford Motor Company collaborated with my lab and decided to implement the technology. You will see where this is going in a second. I published Harvard Business Review paper in 2014 on the new framework, on the new capability, on the new technology. This technology won for best engineering technology in 2014 or 2015. And so between the publication of the paper and the beginning of the pandemic, I was knocking on many doors trying to convince companies that in addition to their focus on efficiency, they should also focus on supply chain resiliency. Very little interest. Maybe 10, 12 companies collaborated with us to look at the resiliency of their supply chain. Everything changed at the beginning of the pandemic, but perhaps not in a way you expect. Think January 2020. The pandemic was in China. It was not in North America and it was not in Europe. I started collecting data on what's happening in China, and I realized, hey, I can use the technologies that I developed 6, 7 years earlier to understand the impact of what's happening in China on supply chain in North America and Europe. And I very quickly submitted and published a paper in Harvard Business Review where the title said, supply chain in North America and Europe will stop by mid-March. And this is exactly what happened. March 17, March 18, newspapers, the New York Times, the Fortune magazine reported that supply chain in the US, in Canada, in Mexico, in Europe are all shutting down. And after that, we got enormous interest in our capability, in our technology, in supply chain resiliency. And I will complement this with just one more paper and a short story. 2 months later, so this is now April of 2020, I published a follow-up paper in Harvard Business Review where I said, executive companies need to apply stress tests for critical supply chain. And I enumerated what are critical supply chain: food, healthcare, life science. And we know now semiconductors. And I said in that paper, the capability is here for companies to apply. I was fortunate to see that the US President economic report, think about what we are describing. We are supply chain and operation people. The US President economic report published last year had a section encouraging companies to use the concept, the model, the framework developed in our research to stress test their supply chain. To me, this is an amazing impact of academic research on supply chain practice.
Absolutely. I didn't know. And I mean, absolutely. And you should be super proud and amazing work. And well, here's one example of being way ahead of your time, Professor. Well, many examples. You have several examples. I guess I have to ask you, because Ford did use the model quite. So how did it work Ford in particular? Did they stick to the model? Because that's also the problem with corporates. Yeah, they sometimes take the right model, but then they forget to apply it.
Yeah. So I don't know the detail of how they have applied the model, but I know that in the automotive industry, 2 companies went through a journey like the one that I described. Ford is one, Toyota is the other one. Everybody suffered, but companies that apply this type of technology were able to recover faster. And in fact, in a recent presentation that I gave, I showed testimonial from 4 or 5 different companies. Ford, Schneider Electric, CEO and President Annette Clayton, executive from Danzo. Danzo is a supplier in the automotive industry. And then the chief procurement officer for a large CPG company, all highlighting the importance of using this type of technology. All, of course, also applied this technology in their supply chain. And so there are examples here where the combination of data, analytics, models makes enormous impact on academic research, forget about that, business performance.
Yeah, real life. I guess as a follow-up, and then we'll go into the work that you do at the lab and the current projects that you're working on. And, now I'm almost thinking like what you're working on today, Professor, I think everybody should focus on, because you might be 10 years again ahead of the curve and jump on some of the projects that you're doing. What I wanted to ask, and in this corporate world, and you talked about resilience many years before it became a thing, I've seen executives, and I'm sure you have as well, balance and not so well balanced, short term, long term. There's always a new thing. I mean, COVID was there, all of a sudden supply chain became the crux of it, because it was. Now, okay, there's still problems all around. You have high inventories. There's other types of problems, not maybe as massive as during COVID. But in my observation, we fail to see what's right in front of us, or there's other bigger fires or bigger problems, and you kind of fail to see the the obvious, or you just Are there certain ways, or did you see certain executives that you've worked with, right, who are better at this? And what do they do? And how can you do as an executive to somehow see this around the corner thing that others
Yeah.
don't see?
This is really a great question, and it's a very timely question. So maybe I will split my answer into two parts, trying to highlight at least my experience. If you look today at what are the key challenges that companies face, there are really three areas. One is inflation. Inflation is affecting, first and foremost, consumer demand, which affect company bottom line. Inflation affects the cost of direct material, transportation, services, transportation. It affects basically everything in your business. So one area of emphasis is efficiency. If I can cut my costs, I will be able to better respond to the increase in price, right? So that's one challenge that today every executive is thinking about. The second is what we just talked about in the last couple of minutes. Resiliency. Disruption is everywhere. And what happened yesterday is not necessarily what will happen next month. And so how do I increase my efficiency, cut my cost, and increase my resilience? Third, with all the changes that we see in the labor market, people are departing. There is a lot of pressure to increase productivity, meaning do more with less. But if you think now about the three areas, efficiency, resiliency, and productivity, they conflict with each other. If you want to cut costs, you are going to increase exposure to risk. If you want to do more with less, if there is a disruption, it will affect your supply chain for a long period of time. The only way, and that brings me to your question, the only way to address these challenges, to cut across the three challenges, is by bringing together data, models, analytics, and automation, right? This is the way to, and this cuts across the three of them, but this is not just science. This is also about art, the ability to complement data analytics and automation with the experience, with the intuition, with the knowledge that supply chain executives have. And so if you ask me, what is a good mix of skills that we need in order to address today's and future challenges? It's this combination of science and art. Science is all the analytics that companies are focusing on. Art is all the experience, the knowledge that executives have. It's this combination of art and science that can make a big impact on supply chain. And there is a fear out there that, hey, the new technology will replace people. My experience is that it's not about replacing, it's about complementing the existing capabilities that we have in the supply chain to make a bigger impact on business performance.
I think the best line that I have seen in recent times with in regards to exactly what you said was, your job won't be replaced. Our jobs won't be replaced by AI. Our jobs will be replaced by a person using AI. And I'm sure you've heard it as well.
Yep.
Now, I was sharing, to link into what you're doing at the lab, I was sharing with Francisco Betti, so he's leading the World Economic Forum on the advanced manufacturing. And he was sharing with me that what he sees as the greatest opportunity of this decade is us as industries and as supply chain professionals figuring out how to really build an efficient end-to-end supply chain in a B2B context, in a business to business. All these industrial conglomerates, all these mega companies. Apple will unlikely, manage to produce the phone that much cheaper. But when you talk about all this big, we're working with industrial conglomerates, billions and billions, the productivity, you talk about planning, the fact that they are, the score model, this simplistic plan, procure, make, deliver is not aligned, is siloed, there's inefficiencies all over. That's a huge opportunity, whether it's resilience, whether it is cost cutting, whether it is sustainability. So tell us a little bit about what you're focused on. What are some of the most interesting projects that you're working with yourself?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, 2011, I started the MIT Data Science Lab, focusing on data science and supply chain. And one area is all about supply chain resiliency. A second area of focus is the ability to use data to improve supply chain and business performance in general. And let me illustrate the second area with an example of Home Depot. We collaborated with Home Depot e-commerce channel. The leadership was trying to increase revenue while managing supply chain cost effectively. Using their data, we realized very quickly that how long it takes to respond to an order increases the probability of purchase. That is, if you can respond much faster to an order, the probability that the customer will purchase the product increases dramatically. This is not true for every product, but there are many product categories for which shorter response time increase the probability of purchase. So now it suggests an opportunity and a challenge. In order to respond quickly, I want to position inventory close to market demand. That would allow me to respond within less than 24 hours. That's great. But if I position inventory closer to market demand, I increase my inventory cost. Here is the question. How do I find the right balance between increasing revenue by positioning inventory close and managing cost effectively by using centralized inventory, by using pooling of demand together in the supply chain? We basically developed a system that allow us to find the right balance and the appropriate trade-off between the two, increase revenue while managing and decreasing supply chain cost. Here is another example, AB InBev, right? One of the largest CPG manufacturing companies, $50+ billion company. They have a very large data science group that is focusing on a variety of challenges, in particular demand forecast. And their demand forecast before the pandemic was highly accurate, extremely accurate demand forecast using multitude of data sources, including macroeconomic, including information about Google Trends and the like. But as soon as the pandemic hit their business, forecast accuracy was destroyed. Question is, what can you do to bring back the accuracy to the original level? We collaborated, the data science lab collaborated with AB and InBev, integrating pandemic modeling. Think about this. We take pandemic modeling that is used to decide, for example, about vaccination policies. We take pandemic modeling, we integrated the pandemic modeling with their old forecast to show that the combination of the two allow us to bring back forecast accuracy to the original level. The challenge was significant because in different regions, different countries, as you know very well, there were different policies that were applied. And so you needed to adjust the pandemic modeling to reflect the specific behavior in a given country. But this combined effort between AB InBev Analytics Group and the MIT Data Science Lab resulted in a new way for forecasting demand in the market. These are the kind of things, the kind of challenges that you can bring to the market. And you understand a better forecast has an impact on everything in your business, finance, supply chain, inventory, even trade, pricing and marketing.
Absolutely. Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Exactly. And I know, I'll give you another example. I know you are originally, I think, from Europe. If you think about the largest online fashion retailer in Europe, it's a company called Zalando. In 2021, revenue was more than $10 billion, 10 billion euros. So it's a very large company. They have every day on their website about 1.4 million SKUs. They collaborated with us even before the pandemic and during the pandemic, so that we together develop a new way for them to forecast demand for 1.4 million SKUs and use this forecast to effectively price product week by week, country by country. They sell their product in 23 different countries in Europe. And the new system that was developed by Zalando and the MIT Data Science Lab is today the one that spit out prices every week for every product in every country. Think about the scale of the challenge that we are focusing on. That's the power of data analytics and, of course, revenue and pricing knowledge.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you, Professor, because you have all these huge companies here. You've mentioned a few great examples, and then of course the smaller ones, the small and medium-sized companies. Now, if you were to give a piece of advice to the CEOs at that, I don't know, 200 million to 10 billion, just pulling out numbers that perhaps don't have the same pockets or resources like the big ones, but at the same time, we both know, and you're an entrepreneur, you've set up companies, we both know that creativity doesn't actually have to be expensive. So my question to you is, what would be some advice that you would give them to also harness or benefit from this analytics data technology that exists and not break the bank?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question, especially now, because perception about data analytics and its impact on supply chain have changed dramatically during the pandemic. Let me be more specific. If you think about business transformation, supply chain digitization, before the pandemic, executive, mid-sized companies, large-sized companies were reluctant to get into this area. Why? Because the perception was that it requires huge investment. Why? Because it takes a long period of time. But during the pandemic, we realized that the future is here, that with moderate investment in digital transformation, and I'll talk a little bit about what it means, and in a relatively short period of time, 12 to 18 months, companies can achieve most of the benefits of full-scale digital transformation. And that is something completely new. So the question that you may ask is, what exactly digital transformation means? And this is across the board. This is mid-sized companies, this is large-sized companies. And what I will reflect is based on implementation in multiple industries: fashion retailing, high-tech, consumer packaged good manufacturing companies, and appliance manufacturer. What digital transformation means, and this is an opportunity for mid-sized companies, as well as, of course, large size, it means 4 important capabilities. One is supply chain segmentation. One-size-fits-all strategy is not appropriate in the supply chain. With data and analytics, we can identify the different segment and what is the supply chain that is appropriate for each segment and develop synergies across segments. The second one is replacing what in industry people call consensus forecast with what I call unified view of demand. What is consensus forecast? In consensus forecast, different functional areas generate their own forecast, and then they come together to agree on a compromise. Not clear that this compromise correctly represents consumer demand. In unified view of demand, we agree only on the data, and we let the analytics generate a forecast that every functional area is used. The third element is smart S&OP, the ability to integrate unified view of demand with an effective S&OP process. And the last one is smart execution or control. Some people will call it control tower. And the idea here is to recognize that as good as your plan is, there are deviations from the plan, there are supply disruption, there are changes in your supply chain. What you want to do is to make sure that you quickly respond to this deviation in disruption to achieve the target business performance that the company is focusing on. And so we learn a lot during the pandemic. Typically, people think about resiliency. I also think about supply chain and digital transformation of the supply chain.
And if you were to fast forward, let's say in 10 years, what do you think are the key things that companies should do today? So in 2011, you were already talking about resilience. So that my question, I guess, is what do you see, maybe not 10 years, it's a random number, yeah, but what do you see in the future that will be the key topic that executives should pay attention to?
I think, and this comes up in a lot of discussions with leaderships and executives in a variety of industries, I think the opportunity and the challenge is to achieve end-to-end visibility in the supply chain. This is important for efficiency. This is important for resiliency. This is important for productivity. But this is not easy. Most companies have good visibility into tier one suppliers. And so when you think about mapping the supply chain, if they do it at all, they will stop at tier one supplier. We know today that this is not enough, that you need to move upstream in the supply chain to get better understanding of the entire chain, tier two, tier three, because what happens in upstream in tier three may have tomorrow an impact on what you see in your business. And the best way to think about that and to illustrate this, think about the global semiconductor supply chain.
Yeah.
Disruption of wafer manufacturer, this is tier four, affect the automotive manufacturer, affect Ford, Toyota, GM, and without understanding and visibility, it will be a big challenge. And so to me, a focus on supply chain visibility end to end, and then how do I benefit from this visibility? How do I use the data, the visibility, the analytics that exist to, remember, achieve the three objectives: efficiency, resiliency, productivity, a really big challenge and opportunity in the next few years.
Love it. And bringing the last segment of our conversation on the skills side, and then, you know, obviously now ChatGPT is the thing, AI, it blew up in the last months. Everybody is an AI expert if you open up social media, LinkedIn, or God knows what. But there is still a valid point to future-proof, if there is such a thing as future-proofing anymore. You know, and you are obviously a professor, you teach the younger generations, but what do you see as the key skills? It can be hard, it can be soft, that you need to have to be a really good, well-rounded supply chain professional?
So there is no one size fits all, but what I encourage my students, and I teach mostly, in addition to PhD students, I teach MBAs and master level students who are interested in supply chain and operation management. What I encourage them is to focus on three areas. One, the analytics side. Understand the capability. You are not going necessarily to be one of the people who are developing a new algorithm, but you need to understand how to use it and when it can make an impact and when you want to apply different technologies to improve business performance. So that's the first part. But remember, this is not just about science. This is also about art. Improve your supply chain skills, because the ability to combine effective skills with business analytics is where I see a multiplicative impact. And the third element, and people talk about the third element a lot, is the ability to communicate and collaborate effectively across the business. Remember the idea of replacing consensus forecast with unified view of demand. Unified view of demand require interdisciplinary teams. Interdisciplinary teams implies that we need to bring together capabilities from finance, from trade, from supply chain, from demand planning, from data science. The ability to communicate your insight and collaborate within the organization, but across functional areas. and collaborate across organizations is where you see a big impact. I think with the capabilities of today technology, we will see more and more companies reinventing their supply chain. This is not going to be a focus on, oh, I need to improve this functional area or this process. This will be looking end to end and reinventing the entire chain. That, to me, is the new mantra around supply chain and operation innovation.
Reinvention. And I mean, you might have seen the images, Professor, with again back to ChatGPT. So I don't know, CEO, CFO, whatever, all ChatGPT, and then Chief Entertainment Officer is a human being. So, and this also reminds me, a large white goods company. One of my friends was one of the board members. They buy a company, so they were in a multi-billion-dollar revenue. They buy this company, 200 people. 200 people. They literally just had the design. So they had designed some, I can't remember, some stuff in the kitchen, anyways, blenders. And they outsourced everything, Professor. They had contract manufacturers for everything. The only thing that they kept, similar in some ways, well, anyways, to Apple, but design and marketing. That's all the things they kept. 200 people. And this big company bought them because they wanted to learn from them how to do. So in some ways, reinvention, yeah, they wanted to take the ideas and the supply chain and reinvent the bigger beast. Many years later, that's why I'm not naming them. Have they succeeded? It's dubious. So sometimes, to your point, it almost feels, it is a feeling, but it's also backed by a lot of track or history, that these big companies are slow because it's normal. There's a lot of people, a lot of legacies, a lot of skeletons in the closet. So it almost feels it's easier to start afresh, and start an entity, and rather than really reinvent on an old skeleton or some sort of a. So anyway, I'll leave it there. What's your views, or what would you comment to that?
So I will illustrate your point with my experience. I collaborated with a large CPG, consumer packaged good manufacturing company, over the last couple of years. The company was very good improving the efficiency of every process in its business. So you look at a specific manufacturing process and find way to fine tune it. They will look at the way they manage inventory in a specific warehouse and find way to improve it. What they realize is, despite all this investment in improving the efficiency of every individual process, supply chain had many challenges: high inventory, large waste, high cost. And the collaboration that we had with them was about, we are not going to focus on individual process. We are going to focus on end-to-end and try to find the right balance between responsiveness and efficiency in the supply chain, starting from unified view of demand, starting from focus accuracy. And the tremendous impact that this led was improvement in focus accuracy, reduction in lost sales, reduction in inventory and waste, and increase in customer satisfaction. That's what I refer to as operation innovation. Rather than fine-tuning a specific process, if you want a big impact, not a 3% reduction in inventory, if your target is 10, 15, 20% improvement in cost, in inventory level, you need to do something much bigger. Smaller improvements are not going to take you in the direction that I just described.
I love it, and I think it's back to the point. So we've recently done with McKinsey. We published a book, and it was we asked so many different executives, and to the point that you've made, they all came around with the same sharing. You gotta think end to end. You gotta think holistically. you can have the best Lean Six Sigma process operations excellence in the world. But ultimately, if it's just on the manufacturing, if it's just on specific processes and you're not looking at the holistic view end to end of your supply chain, is not going to achieve much. Or
Exactly.
it's not going to achieve
Exactly.
as much as you rightfully said. You're not going to, maybe you achieve 2%, but you might end up with a better, cheaper product, but in the wrong place at the wrong time, stuck with the wrong customer. So what did you
Exactly.
actually achieve in the overall scheme of things? Nothing.
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
so love that point. So on that note, Professor, thanks a lot for the time.
Thank you.
Lots of examples, lots of insights. I will urge, and I will obviously link you up on the podcast, and urge everybody to check your work and keep inspiring and keep educating the next generation of supply chain professionals.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also, subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.